Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of AZ-900 Live. This is Azure Fundamentals number 2, where we continue with our journey through cloud concepts and helping you get certified in the AZ-900. So just about this series, if you are coming in new, this was a new series based on student requests to really give you a bit of live help as you're looking to study for the AZ-900, and the Skylines Academy team can assist you with questions as you're going through. This is episode 2, as I mentioned. Episode 1 aired a few weeks ago, so check that out on YouTube. And this series starts with the AZ-900 exam. That's the Azure Fundamentals exam. And in the first episode, I went through the curriculum there that you go back and check over. Videos air every Friday at 12 p.m. CST, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Occasionally we skip a Friday, but that's the general routine there that we have. And last but not least, submit your questions each week and I will aim to answer them on the show. So if you are studying for your AZ-900, send in your questions and I will answer them for you. A couple of things. Don't forget to hit the like button for us and hit the subscribe button so you can get notified of all the episodes as they come out. But more importantly, and as a thank you for doing that, we're also going to go ahead and give you the entire AZ-900 Skylines Academy training course completely free. That's over 5 hours of training. That's the entire course. I went through it a little bit last episode as well. And essentially all you need to do is either click the link in the description or use the code AZ900YT when you sign up for the AZ900 course at skylinesacademy.com, and you will get the entire course completely for free, and that's everything you need to pass the AZ-900 exam. And obviously you still have these sessions as well where I'll continue to give you some additional information around the topics. So with that, let's continue our journey on understanding cloud concepts. And what this session is going to cover are the following 4 things. 1, we're going to do a quick review of economies of scale and cloud economics that we covered, last time, and we hit Opex and Capex. I just want to go over a few things there that I wanted to add based on some student feedback. Number 2, we'll describe the differences between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And then number 3, describe the differences between public, private, and hybrid cloud models. And number 4, we need to compare and contrast the different models. And that is directly related. If you go and look at the AZ-900 curriculum, those are the next topics that we need to cover, to keep going. So without any delay, let's begin and let's hit the cloud economics topic first of all. Well, to begin with, you do need to understand economies of scale. And this essentially is the ability to do things more efficiently or at a lower cost per unit when you're operating at that larger scale. And that's because you get a lot of benefits with cloud, and this is cloud providers can pass on these economies of scale to consumers. So just think about the amount of Intel CPUs, AMD CPUs that Microsoft are able to purchase, and they're getting a bigger discount on those CPUs, so they can pass on some of those savings to you. They acquire essentially all that hardware, CPUs, and other pieces at much lower cost. They're just really good at managing the data center, and they have local government deals, that they can get done as well. And, again, they're just really, really efficient. I mentioned in the last episode that video on, looking at the Azure data center. Go to Microsoft's website and, Google, Azure data center video, and you will see Microsoft has a really cool video that kind of walks you through, how they operate their data centers and how they secure them and everything. Fantastic to watch. So let's just contrast Capex versus Opex again now. So Capex, this is spending on infrastructure where you do it upfront and you write those costs off over a period of time. So again, think if you want to do something in your data center, you would do a capital expenditure. You would buy that hardware, buy those storage arrays, buy those servers, pay for that upfront, and then write it off, for your business over time. Opex, in contrast, no upfront cost. You pay for the service as you consume it, and you deduct it just like an expense in the same year that it occurs. A lot of it, pros and cons, to both of those. Typical on-premises Capex costs are things like your server costs, storage costs, network costs. You have to buy all those Cisco switches, etc. Backup, archive, all those kind of things. and data center costs as well. Now you still also have Opex costs because you have to run everything in the data center, so you have to take that into account as well when you're in the data center. But these are typical on-premises Capex costs. Typical Opex costs for cloud computing, when you're thinking about Azure, these are things like the server lease costs. I want to run a virtual machine for a period of time. I pay for what I use there. Software and feature leases, maybe I'm adding on additional software. This would also typically be on demand in a lot of cases. And then usage, demand, cost, scaling. I think this is very important again, because if you've got seasonal demand, I talked about this a little bit, you can, last week I talked about it where you've got a retail website, perhaps on Black Friday or around Christmas time, a lot of use, and then maybe you can scale it back later on, which means you didn't have to buy all that hardware that you only needed for that period of time. So very, very important there. Now just go over the benefits again. The Capex benefits are predictability. You know pretty much you've paid for this. This is what it's going to cost. And it's also very cost effective when you can consume the infrastructure quickly. So again, with Capex, if I buy it and I don't consume it for a long period of time, probably not the best, use of my cash, right? Whereas Opex, I can try and buy, I can experiment, I can try something out. If it doesn't work out, I can, change and do something else or try another service. I'm not committed to that big expense, lower initial costs, and then my, demand can fluctuate. But that also makes it a little bit unpredictable, right? Because you might think you were sizing it for this and you realize, okay, I need more now and I have to add this on and a few other things. A lot of times people oversize in the Capex, and so they feel like it's a bit more predictable, but that also depends how good you are at managing those services, over time. So that really covers, just to recap, Capex and Opex. I just wanted to reinforce that. There's a lot of discussion of that, a lot of things you'll typically get on the exam, just making sure you understand the differences there and really emphasize the pay-as-you-go model. Okay, and with that, it's time for us to turn to the anything as a service conversation. And before I jump into IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, I thought it's helpful, and I use this in the course as well. A lot of people like this analogy to pizza as a service. So think about it this way. Your traditional on-premises, you could think of this like making a pizza at home, right? You've got to get the cheese, the toppings, the tomato sauce, pizza dough, you got to get the fire going or the oven going there, electric, gas you're responsible for, the soda, the Coke, whatever you're going to provide there, and you got to have like a dining room table or table of some sort for people to serve it on, and so that's kind of like the traditional model, right? And if you think about it, then you've got another model would be for pizza is take and bake, right? And this is where you go to, say, a store and you pick it up and then you bake it at home. So now you're not responsible for buying the cheese, the toppings, the tomato sauce, the pizza dough. You buy that all pre-assembled for you. You're still responsible for cooking the pizza in your oven or the appliance of choice, basically. So that's kind of the next way, right? And then you've got like, okay, now I want to go like a Domino's thing. I'm going to get the pizza delivered. So now they're actually doing all the way up there, except for the dining room table, and perhaps you're going to supply your own Coke or Sprite or whatever your favorite drink is. But they're going to do the cheese, the toppings, the tomato sauce, the pizza dough. And they're going to like cook it for you now, and then they're going to bring it to you, right? So that's like, think of that like almost like platform as a service as we get into it. And then software as a service, think about this like dining out, right? Everything is taken care of for you. Everything's provided for you, and you just consume it, as is there. And so think about this as what you manage and what the vendor manages. And if you think about it in that way, it'll be very easy for you to digest as we get more into the specifics of the examples on the top. So let's look at this in the real context of the data center, right? In a traditional data center, you manage everything, right? The networking, the storage, the servers, the virtualization layer, the power, the cooling, everything there, the operating systems that go onto the virtual machines or onto the servers, the middleware tier, the runtime, the data, the applications, everything is there for you to manage. As you move on to infrastructure as a service, you're basically saying the vendor is going to manage networking, storage, servers, virtualization. Now, that's not to say in the cloud, you still have to configure some of those things. But for the most part, when you say, hey, I'm going to consume a virtual machine from Azure, I'm saying these other things, I'm not responsible for them at that like data center layer, but I do have to deal with my OS, my middleware, runtime, data, and applications. And that's the parts that I manage when I deploy a virtual machine. If we then look at platform as a service, even more of these things are covered for me. Right now that somebody's given me an operating system, good way to think about this is something like Azure App Service. If you want to get more into the specific Azure components, we are going to cover more of them in subsequent episodes. But here you're saying, okay, I don't even want to care about operating systems anymore. I want something preloaded with my middleware and runtime. I still want to code and deploy my application and data, etc. But I'm going to run that on these PaaS services. And some people get confused with this because you have platform as a service could be something like Azure SQL, which is like an infrastructure managed service provided to you, or it could be one of these like app fabrics where they give you something with a specific version that you can code your applications against. So just think about it as what's being provided for me, but good examples of PaaS services in the context for the AZ-900 could be like Azure SQL, Azure App Service, some of the IoT services, things like that are being provided for you. You don't have to build the VMs or the servers and then load the software and everything on. You would load your applications and data on top of that. And then we move on to SaaS, which is, completely managed stacks, if you will. Now, I always say like, apps and data there, you're still going to consume the service and do things in there. So you might configure things a certain way. Good examples of this are things like Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, Microsoft 365, where you get something like, Microsoft Teams as an example. You're still going to use that software and run it and connect with people and manage rights and permissions and things. But this is ultimately a software as a service. They're providing the entire thing for you. You're not creating Microsoft Teams and then deploying it. That whole service is being provided for you. So think about these. It's definitely important that you understand them. Think about infrastructure as a service. You essentially are, consuming things like virtual machines. You're consuming things like your infrastructure that Azure is providing for you. Those things are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. Really are those runtime environments where you'll code applications and run them on your PaaS service, and then full SaaS is, all in, if you will. So, try to make sure you understand this, and hit us up if you've got any questions around this. Then we have cloud deployment models. I get a lot of questions about this. There's a few actually that we have for today's session to talk about. Well, first of all, you've got public cloud, which obviously we're talking about in the context. You've probably taken this course because you want to learn about Microsoft Azure. And this is a common deployment model now. Azure, AWS, GCP are examples of what we consider public cloud providers. Everything runs on your cloud provider's hardware, as we've talked about, some of those economies of scale too. And there are some advantages and disadvantages. So with public cloud, high scalability, high agility. We talked about some of that in the first episode. Pay-as-you-go pricing, again, we talked about Capex and Opex. You're not responsible for maintenance or updates of the hardware. This is a big thing. People spend a lot of time, making sure the data centers are maintained. Microsoft would take care of that for you in the Azure scenario, and minimal technical knowledge required to get started. Now, so I sort of caveat the minimal there. That's obviously what a lot of the vendors say. That is definitely a benefit here. You can get up and running quickly, but obviously there's advanced certifications for a reason. Disadvantages, there may be specific security requirements that cannot be met by using public cloud. That's largely going away today, but there are still scenarios there where you do have to be completely in control of everything. There may be government policies, industry standards, or legal requirements which public clouds cannot meet. But again, a lot of those things Microsoft and Amazon and Google are all constantly trying to overcome. So definitely a lot more advantages today than disadvantages. You don't own the hardware. You can certainly think about that as a disadvantage if you want. So you can't customize everything, but for the most part, a lot of people say, well, I don't necessarily want to manage that anyway. So something to consider there. Unique business requirements is one last one here, where you just may have some specific scenarios or specific ways you're trying to connect something or create something that those services just don't provide. Again, I think this is very rare now as well, but another example there. Private cloud now. I spent a lot of my career before I got into public cloud. I used to create a lot of private clouds for organizations, and this is where you create a cloud-like environment in your own data center. So you build like a portal on top of your hardware. You maybe have like a VMware stack and servers. You're responsible for the hardware and software services you provide. And so these are things like self-service, automation, agility, financial transparency. Think about this as like building your own version of like Azure in your data center, and you can imagine it takes a considerable amount of work. And if you think about the advantages here, you have complete control over all resources and can support legacy scenarios. And some people will also import their legacy VMs into their private cloud. You have complete security control. You may be able to, meet these strict compliance requirements that the public cloud cannot if there's some specific issues you're running into. And then if you think about the disadvantages, you've got large upfront costs here. I will say the skill set required here, it required a lot of highly skilled people to create the automation required to do it. So that was always a challenge. And owning equipment adds a lag into that provisioning, process, as a whole. Data center management, this is also the big thing. Do you really want to be in the business of managing the data center, or are you better suited to, say, onboard services from Azure and maybe present those in a portal like ServiceNow? It's up to you ultimately if you prefer to be in that game, but a lot of people don't. A lot of businesses say, I'm not in the business of, IT. My business is, if I'm in retail, my business is to, sell goods. I don't really want to be in the IT business. The more I can offload and outsource that, and maybe data center management is one of those things. Public cloud helps you with that. Hybrid cloud is the big one lately. It combines public and private clouds. And essentially what this is allowing you to do is, it's flexibility to run in the most appropriate location. So you probably have a data center, or especially if you're coming from a large enterprise, you have a data center footprint, you have VMware running there, potentially, you've got a whole bunch of servers and hardware and operating systems. Does it really make sense for you to lift and shift everything to public cloud? Probably not, unless you're going to modernize and, enhance your applications or move to some of those PaaS services that allow some infrastructure moves. So what a lot of people do is they will say, okay, well, I'm going to keep what I've got as is. I've already perhaps made those capital investments, but I'm going to add on some public cloud. I'm going to add Azure on. And so now I'm going to connect Azure to my data center and allow my workloads to talk to each other, allow network connectivity, etc. across those. And this allows you to then consume public cloud services as needed and potentially keep some of those legacy workloads on premises. And perhaps over time you retire them, move them to public cloud, and eventually sunset those data centers. You just need to decide what's the most important thing for you to be focused on at that point. If you're just trying to go for efficiency and you're not building new apps, maybe you do move them. If you just focus on the businesses moving so quickly, I've got to focus on new apps, maybe just leave those as they are and come back to them, later on. So advantages, flexibility, support for those legacy systems while you learn in the modern application workload scenarios that we want to move to public cloud. And again, you can continue to use those investments. And then the disadvantages, complicated to maintain and set up because you're maintaining, the on-premises, private cloud to some extent now, at least the on-premises data center, and you're still learning a new cloud technology. And it can be more expensive than simply selecting one model. Maybe it's just time to say, okay, I'm going to get out of that business. I'm going to move to public cloud, make that investment, get it done, retire the data center. Those are things to consider depending on your investments in the on-premises data center already. With that though, did we cover it all? Well, one, we've covered the whole section of reviewing the economies of scale and cloud economics. So I think we can call that a check. Hopefully if you came to the episode previously, this will resonate with you and just solidify that knowledge. We've described the differences between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. We've described the differences between public, private, and hybrid cloud models, and we've contrasted those different models across everything there. And so with that, if you've got this far in these 2 episodes, you've now covered 15 to 20% of the exam. So if you just continue to stick with this, we are already motoring through very, very quickly. So just keep at it, bite-sized chunks, as I like to say to people, and we will definitely get there. But let's take a few other questions that we had come in, because I think they'll also help with some of the knowledge to solidify that. Do most customers go public or private? So I guess, just going back to that hybrid scenario, I would say most of the very large enterprises I work with in consulting that I do, they are enterprise customers that are in the hybrid scenario. I would say every single one of them I work with today has a public cloud desire or is already in there. They're trying to operationalize it. They're trying to get more value out of the public cloud. They probably have a lot of legacy virtual machines running on-prem. But I would say hybrid is the most common scenario I encounter. Now, if you were to ask me what a new business should do when they start up, I would say just go public. That's where people are generally going, unless you have specific use cases to require you to build out a data center, lease that space and everything. So hybrid is probably the most popular one now. How do I know what is managed in the different service models. Yes, this is kind of an interesting one. You essentially need to look at the individual services, and we will get onto some of those in subsequent episodes as well. So these are things like, okay, well, if I look at VMs, I know what's being managed, right? I don't have to manage the hypervisor. I just go and request a VM. I choose the software-defined network I want to connect it to. That's also provided for me as a service, so I can kind of tell very quickly there. As you move up the stack, though, I think this question probably really applies to the PaaS services. If you use Azure App Service, and again, we'll get into some of those, you'll be able to know, okay, what's provided from that service. What programming languages does it support? If I go to something like Microsoft Azure SQL because I want to deploy a database, what does that provide? What do I have to adhere to from a database schema perspective? And all that is detailed. Think of every PaaS service as like an individual product that you buy and paying as you go, but you're buying it from Microsoft. It has its own product manual, documentation, specifications, everything there, and that will tell you, what is managed in those different models. Is PaaS usually cheaper? It's actually an interesting one because for the longest time, I think a lot of people made assumptions that it was. In some cases, I did for some of the services. But when you sort of dug in and looked at the data, it's sort of a bit mixed, really. Some cases, it's more expensive. SQL was a big indicator in Azure, where you had you could build VMs and deploy SQL on it. In the IaaS model, you could consume PaaS, SQL, Azure SQL, and they also had a PaaS service, and they do now, called SQL Managed Instances. So there were different options depending on the use case you wanted to, but in some cases, managed instances would be more expensive than deploying on IaaS. But then you're gaining benefits like much easier disaster recovery. I don't have to maintain the clustering scenarios on SQL for high availability. So there are a lot of caveats there to when you're doing IaaS. So even if PaaS has a premium over you doing it yourself, think about the costs of you doing it yourself and maintaining it. And generally speaking, as you move up the stack into these more modern applications, you start to use serverless container services and other things out there. PaaS services like that are just going to make your life a lot easier, and you can do more creative things to reduce costs. Maybe you don't have to have 3 IaaS environments, one for dev, stage, and prod. Maybe you've built a pipeline that can just deploy into PaaS services. Say Azure App Service with deployment slots is a great example that comes up pretty regularly. So yeah, it's an it depends question there, and I don't think you'll get so much questions on that, but you'll definitely need to know in later episodes. We cover the pricing calculator, so go check that out. On Azure's website, look at the pricing calculator there, and that will help you as well. So with that, again, don't forget to hit the like button, just like everybody on YouTube. I got to ask the question. And please subscribe to the channel so you can get notified. This is the end of episode 2 now, and I'd love for you to continue with us as we continue down this journey together. Don't forget, you can use that coupon code, link in the description. Go sign up, completely free. There's no catch there whatsoever. Put your email in. If you want to get marketing emails from us, please say yes to that. We'll certainly send you coupons and other things over time for all our other courses. We have a whole library at Skylines Academy, but this course, no catch, completely free for you. And I'd love for you to just take the whole course and then be ready for your exam. Don't forget that AZ-900 study guide that's on our website. I talked about that before. That tells you how to prepare for your exam, everything you need to know there. So with that, thank you, and join me again next week. You can find me on Twitter at vnexc. Would love for you to follow, send me a question. I'd love to hear from people, especially as you pass your exams, at Skylines Academy to reach the team. And don't forget to join our Facebook study group as well. You'll find lots of students, going for this exam there. So with that, thank you again, and good luck in your exams.